everybody. We're here again with Mark Collinsworth of Ver Global Financial. And Mark is going to talk with us this evening about the impact of the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell's speech this week at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and what that may mean for the trends of the market ahead. So, Mark, welcome back. And what's the upshot of the grand poobah of the Federal Reserve speech this week?
Well, really what it boils down to is the Fed is now talking about tapering at some point in the future. Right now, they're buying about $50 billion in bonds every month. They're keeping interest rates at low. So they're now discussing on reducing that 50 billion. And of course, in the process of doing that, bonds actually rallied. Interest rates actually fell on Friday from that, and gold took off like a rocket. And the reason why gold took off like a rocket and the US dollar fell is because the longer the Fed goes with not being aggressive on tightening, that locks in the inflationary trends for a much, much longer time period.
In other words, it increases inflation for a longer period?
Correct. The longer the Fed goes, the longer the Fed keeps a QE program in place, and the longer they keep interest rates at zero, the higher the probability that inflation will take a stronger hold in the economy. So
that's not good then. Won't that disturb the economic recovery?
It will, but Joe Biden's already doing a good job on that already. So a lot of the inflation that we have right now is, of course, is caused from all the government spending programs. And then, of course, the Fed, well, let me back up a second. One of on the other side of the equation, one of the theories that has been kind of bounced around, and this actually came from an economist during the 1930s, or actually 1920s, Dr. Irving. He's one of the guys that made the famous quote that stocks had reached a permanent high plateau and they could only go higher. And of course, he was absolutely wrong on that. So he started looking at why the Great Depression occurred and discovered that the reason why we had a deflationary depression was because of all the debt that the United States government had actually taken on.
Well, there's been continuing predictions by economists and prognosticators that we're headed for a big crash, maybe even something that will equal or exceed the crash of '29, and it'll come maybe within a year or so. What do you think of those predictions?
I'm going to say I believe they are absolutely correct on it. However, I think they are probably about 5 to 6 years too early on the prediction.
So we're 5 to 6 years away from a huge crash.
Correct. And the reason why it takes that kind of time, if you look at from when the Federal Reserve started doing all this aggressive interest rate cuts, when the dot-com bubble popped, it took almost 7 years for a new bubble to form someplace else, which is the housing market. And then, of course, when they started all the housing bubble quantitative easing, they just kept on adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. So if what you see here is the Fed knows they've gotten themselves in a box. They can never really take QE away from the marketplace because it would just cause such horrendous problems. And I believe what you're going to see is like a lot of your retail investors now are going out and they're borrowing money to buy stocks on. I think that's going to continue to push the stock market higher and higher until we have a true recession and all these people get wiped out. I mean, I've had numerous people talk to me about Bitcoin going to 200,000, the stock market going to the S&P 500 going to 12,000. And these are from people that know nothing about stocks, know nothing about economics, know nothing about investment theory, but yet they're extremely, extremely bullish on stocks. And I don't even know one person that's getting a mortgage on his house to go out and buy stocks like Amazon and Bitcoin and Google because he thinks that in another 4 or 5 years, the 40 or 50,000 second mortgage he took will be worth $100,000 to $200,000, and he can pay off the entire mortgage along with his house. I just think that's just ridiculous.
Do you see any wild cards that might affect things to make it happen sooner or later?
Not really. And the reason why I say that is because the Fed knows that they've got themselves in a really, really bad problem. This problem is not something that occurred basically over the last 2 or 3 years. This has been a problem in the making for the last 30 to 40 years. And no Federal Reserve governor wants to be stuck in the boat of being the one that collapsed the economy. If you go back and look at a guy called, his name was Blackwell, Fed Governor Blackwell, the only reason I even remember his name is that he was the Federal Reserve governor that got blamed for the Great Depression. Mm-hmm. outside of him, I don't know any other Federal Reserve governor other than the Greenspan and Bernanke and Powell and Yellen. That's pretty much it. But he's in the history books as causing the Great Depression. So where I'm going at with that is Powell, all these guys know they're in a bad situation, and they're going to keep on trying to pump as much juice into the thing to try to basically kick the can down the road to the next person.
Now, what about what's going on in Afghanistan? Some people say that this is going to embolden China and extend China's reach even sooner into the whole region there. The next domino to fall would be Taiwan. And if that happens, China moves into the entire South Pacific, exerts its authority there economically, militarily. So in other words, there's predictions that what's going on in Afghanistan is going to accelerate the rise of China, which is going to make it a more rapid decline of the U.S. economy. What do you say to that?
I definitely see there's a possibility of that. I definitely think right now China is thinking about, is it looking at how they can basically take Taiwan under their infrastructure, because Taiwan's a huge technological center for semiconductors and stuff, which is the lifeblood for technology. And China realizes, based on everything they've seen over the past decades, and especially now to Afghanistan, that Joe Biden is a very, very weak leader and just will not stand up to them. Versus Donald Trump, they were scared to death of Donald Trump. Just like, under Ronald Reagan with the Iranian hostage situation. If you remember, it was 4 seconds after Ronald Reagan put his hand down after he took the oath of president and was the official president, Iran said they're releasing all of the hostages because they knew he was going to rain ungodly hell down on top of them with everything he had if he didn't get those hostages back. And we don't have like that anymore.
Although some say that the hostage release was intentionally delayed until Reagan got in. It was already arranged, but they wanted to make Carter look bad. That's another scenario that's been theorized.
That might be true too, but look at what happened when Gaddafi messed with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan rained ungodly hell down on top of him and basically bombed the country back into the Stone Age. Look what happened with Grenada. The invasion of Grenada under Ronald Reagan lasted 16 hours because he brought the hammer down on top of them.
Yeah. Well, so therefore, what I'm asking, Mark, is because of the weakness being shown by the American presidents in Afghanistan, does that make it more likely that China will invade Taiwan all the sooner?
I don't know if it means they'll do it sooner, but I definitely think they're at least talking about it right now. And the reason why I think China is not going to push it hot and heavy is China, believe it or not, China's afraid of two things that the U.S. military has. One is the U.S. submarine fleet. They are scared to death of the submarine fleet. Why? Because if you park that submarine fleet off the coast of China, that submarine fleet can lock it down to where there's not a single ounce of food coming into that country. The second thing is the tanks. We're only one of 2 countries in the world that have tanks that can move and shoot at the same time with 100% accuracy ratio. You put all those tanks over in the desert to the west of China, because 90% of the population is just on the coastline, within 100 miles of the coastline. Those tanks can sit there and put the tanks in reverse and go backwards and fire on top of their soldiers and not get hit. Well, our tanks actually have 3 times greater range than any other tank on the planet.
Of course, tanks and other advanced weaponry is now in the hands of the Taliban and soon to be in the hands of China, no?
Correct. A lot of that technology is going to be passed on to them. It's going to take them decades. I had one of my friends one time, and of course he was in the submarine corps. He told me that he said, and this is back when Russia had basically stolen some of the submarine plans from the U.S. military, and he said they had no concern about it so much whatsoever because the submarine technology is so advanced. It would be like the Russians looking at it. It'd be like a caveman trying to figure out what E = MC² is. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that's probably the same for the tanks.
Yeah, although, the Chinese are pretty adept at technologies. It wouldn't be like the Taliban trying to figure it out, but the Chinese, I think, would.
Chinese probably, because the Taliban I'm not worried about. The Chinese getting a hold of it could be another equation.
That's what I mean. It could be a different ballgame now because of that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, well, okay. Now, also, speaking of Afghanistan, the rare earth metals that are plentiful in Afghanistan, and also it has to be used in chip making. That will never fall into the hands of the Chinese, correct?
That's correct. The loss of Afghanistan is a lot more devastating than a lot of people realize. And that's why I'm kind of a very strong believer, maybe not this year, but somewheres in the near future, you're going to have to re-invade Afghanistan and take it back over, because it's just become such a strong military stronghold for the security of the United States now.
Will that be under Joe Biden, or will he be gone?
I don't think Joe Biden really has the cojones to go in there and basically start a redo of a war that he basically messed up to begin with. If you have to redo a reinvasion, it's all going to be blamed on him. I don't think you'll see the reinvasion of Afghanistan until after the Republicans control both the Senate and the GOP. And the only reason why I'm saying that if Biden does it then, once the Senate's controlled by the GOP and the House of Representatives under the GOP, I think you're going to see so many investigations into Hunter Biden. You're going to see so many investigations into Afghanistan. You're going to see so many investigations into political donations from China to the Biden campaign, that he'll have to invade Afghanistan just to kind of, the tail wags the dog thing.
Okay, but some people say that sounds like what they would do if they retake control of the House, the Senate, and perhaps the White House. But the problem is both parties are on the take, one way or the other. There are deals with big tech. There are deals with big pharma. All these huge multinational corporations that make their campaign donations to them. So they're both sides, Democrats and Republicans, are beholden to that big money, and therefore it's those huge corporations that are really the government in effect.
That's correct, and you are absolutely correct. We the people really doesn't mean anything anymore. It's now we the corporations really control things.
Oh, that's what I'm saying, Mark. So if that's the case, and we seem to agree on that, then why would either side start all these investigations into what happened in Afghanistan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, when they're both on the take and they don't want to stop, they don't want to kill the cow that's giving them that golden milk?
Oh, that's a good point. When they start these investigations, both sides know they're never going to go anyplace. They're just simply there to persuade voters to vote for the other party. That's all they're there for. Nothing ever happened with the Trump investigations. Nothing ever happened really with the Clinton investigations, both for Hillary and Bill. All they're doing, the investigations are simply there to put a smudge on the other party between now and the next election. That's all they're there for. How many investigations do you remember ever resulted in somebody getting punished?
Yeah, that's true. Now, that leads me to my next question. You seem to be of the opinion that Biden will not be forced out. He won't be impeached. He won't be removed to the 25th Amendment. He's going to survive the Afghanistan debacle.
Correct. And I think part of the reason on that is, and this is one of the, if you ever read, I think I mentioned this to you before, there's a book called The 13 Keys to the White House. And the Dr. Litchin, who's the guy that wrote the book, is basically there's 13 things that make you either win or lose a re-election or a new election. And he's a very big consultant to the Democratic Party. He's actually the person, believe it or not, when Bill Clinton was thinking about running for president back in 1992, Bill Clinton didn't actually want to run for president because he said there's no way that he could beat George Bush Sr. because of the Gulf War. And Litchin convinced him on the 13 keys it was impossible for Bush Sr. to win re-election. The Democrats now go by the 13 keys hot and heavy as part of their guidelines to win re-elections. They know under the 13 keys, if Joe Biden is removed from office, that's another strike against them under the scandal key, and they can't afford that. And that's why they actually brought a scandal against Donald Trump last year, because a scandal, which is impeachment or removal from office, actually qualifies as a strike on the 13 keys.
All right, last question before we wrap up this session. Getting back to Jerome Powell, his speech in Jackson Hole this week, and his message to the troops. is that going to change anything very much? Is it going to move the needle one way or the other? Is Wall Street going to be reassured or get nervous, or is everything pretty much status quo? Is that the upshot, that it's still status quo?
Status quo. I still think, we here over the next, 5 or 6 years before things blow up again, because it'll just reach critical mass. You're still going to have, your 10 and 15% sell-offs in the stock market, which I think, those would be great buying opportunities if you get them. But at some point, there's going to be a 15% correction that's going to start, 6-7 years down the road, and people are going to think that's a buying opportunity, just like they did at the beginning of 2008. And those people are going to end up going to the poorhouse, just like they did in 2008 when they started buying in February and March, when the market was just down 10 or 15%.
All right. Well, Mark Collinsworth of Ver Global Financial, thanks once again for your expertise in analyzing the state of the economy and the future trends, the way it's heading. And we'll be back to talking with you soon as more developments occur on Wall Street and Afghanistan and other elements that are going to affect the economy one way or the other. Mark, thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.